Marty, tell everybody where you were last time we talked.
I was in a New York State prison serving a sentence of 50 years to life, where my first parole board appearance would have been October of 2040.
Wow.
So, had my conviction not been overturned, had I not been exonerated, I would still be in a maximum security prison cell right now as we speak.
This situation is absolutely beyond belief. You woke up on the first day of your senior year in high school and sadly discovered that your mother and father had been brutally stabbed and bludgeoned. Your mother, Arlene, was dead. Your father, Seymour, he was fighting for his life, and you called 911 and gave first aid to him, but he later succumbed, correct?
And that is all correct, yes.
Tell us what happened from that point forward. You wake up that morning, you find them.
After calling 911, law enforcement showed up at my house pretty quickly. I had some family members who showed up, but I was isolated, I was separated. And instead of me going to the hospital where I wanted to go, where my family demanded I go, I was taken to police headquarters. And instead of being with my family, my father, I was interrogated for countless hours. The interrogation wasn't audio recorded, there was no video, there was no stenographic transcript of it. And after countless hours, the detective said, I confess to the brutal murder of my mother and the attempted murder of my father at that moment. And I was arrested. And that was the last day I saw freedom for several weeks until I was given bail.
Now, you were taken to the police station and you were interrogated for countless hours. How many hours are we talking about here?
We really don't know. I mean, because all I remember, it was brought in when it was light out. And when I finally left, it was dark out. And since law enforcement chose to be deceptive, dishonest, a lot of the record keeping wasn't accurate. But we would say that the interrogation was probably anywhere from 6 to 10 hours if we had to give an estimate. And a windowless room, no food, no water, no contact to the outside world other than, well-seasoned homicide detectives.
Now, this was Suffolk County, right?
It was Suffolk County, New York.
Yeah. And this was a law enforcement agency that was under investigation for corruption at the time, including coerced confessions. You didn't know any of this at the time, of course, but we know it now.
We know it now. And one of the primary focuses of that investigation was K. James McCready, who was the lead detective in my case, who showed up at the crime scene, my home, shortly after 911 phone call when he wasn't scheduled to be working that day. He was supposed to be at his construction site, but he showed up in maybe a half hour dressed in a suit and tie.
Wow. Now, as I understand it, there was a finding that he had perjured himself in a prior murder case.
That's absolutely true. He had obtained a false confession in a prior murder case where he elicited confession that a knife was in a particular location. And what ended up happening was at a later point, they actually found the real knife in a completely different location. And it was a judge, Stuart Nam, who demanded the governor, which was Mario Cuomo back then, to conduct a special investigation into Suffolk County and their tactics. And it was a finding that McCready had committed perjury, but it didn't stop him from remaining on the police force.
Wow. Now, he faked a phone call and told you that your father had regained consciousness and identified you as his attacker.
That is absolutely correct. And that was just one of the many lies that he told.
What, as a 17-year-old kid being hammered by these professional interrogators in a windowless room with no food, emotionally torn down because you know what's happened to your mother and father. Take me through that moment when he tells you your father has just identified you as the attacker.
For people to understand, you gotta have to understand being, isolated, separated. You're being told that, that these law enforcement who I was brought up to believe in and trust in were telling me that they had evidence of my hair in my mother's hands. And then all of a sudden McCready does this fake phone call where he comes in, he goes, listen, Marty, he goes, we know you did this murder. They just pumped your father full of adrenaline and he identified you. And at that very moment, the world just comes crushing down on you. There's this disbelief. And I said, there's no way my father would say that. I said, the only reason why he would say something like this is because I helped perform 911 on the first aid that morning. And McCready goes, kind of stop the bullshit, Marty. We know you did it. Your father just said you did it. Just tell us you did it. And that's kind of how they get false confessions. They have you starting to believe their lies. And you kind of almost fight with your own brain because you know what the truth is. And for me, being this innocent kid, growing up trusting law enforcement, here I have law enforcement telling me that what I know to be true isn't true.
I've talked to prosecutors, federal and state prosecutors, that even in the face of DNA evidence, even in the face of confessions from actual killers, are still skeptical of false confessions. They'll say, look, people just don't confess to crimes they don't commit. I mean, there are intelligent people that, in the face of overwhelming empirical scientific evidence, are still skeptical that somebody would confess to a crime that they did not commit. Do you find people that still look at you askance?
Without a doubt. And what I have to do is I explain to people is that I can prove to you in about a minute that you'd falsely confess to something you wouldn't do. And they kind of look at me like, how can you do that? I said, okay. And I usually do this in a very large crowd. I said, everybody who has a sibling, please stand up. I said, everybody who, when they were home alone with their sibling and your parents went out, a lamp broke, a plate broke, something broke, remain standing. Then remember when your parents came home and said, we're not going out for ice cream till somebody tells us that they broke the lamp, they broke the plate? How many in this room said they broke the lamp, they broke the plate because they wanted ice cream? Generally speaking, about 50% of the people remain standing. I go, you just confessed to something you didn't do. And all of a sudden, you kind of get these wide eyes kind of going, oh God. And I go, that was for ice cream. Imagine something that's a million times worse with a threat of execution, the threat of death, the threat of imprisonment, the threat of more psychological torture, more physical abuse. You'll say anything for it to end. But then people kind of say, I kind of get it now. I go, think about it. You said you broke a lamp or a plate for ice cream. And that's when you start to get people to say, maybe I would. And it's one of those moments where you have to simplify it so much for people to get it. And even then, sometimes they kind of say, well, that would never happen to me.
Yeah, that's because they haven't been there, particularly on the heels of the trauma. And then 17 years of your life are gone.